Hi guys, I have something different for you today, which I hope you will find interesting and useful. In the past, I have talked about how nervous we all get when we have to use English to talk to native speakers. And many of you have left comments about your own fears and experiences. However, today I have a letter sent in by a viewer in which he describes an experience that is every language student's worst nightmare, namely, being laughed at because of his way of speaking. His letter tells his story very clearly, and he has kindly given me permission to read it to you guys, so I will just do that and let him tell his story in his own words. But I want you to listen right to the end because this story turns out very differently from what you might expect. And after reading his story, I'll share with you a couple of my own embarrassing stories that I have already experienced after living in the United States for just a month and a half. So let me scooch over. Here it goes. Dear Anna, I'm a native speaker of English, so obviously I don't need English lessons. However, I've had a lifelong interest in foreign languages, so much of what you have to say applies to my experiences as well. And when you talked about the fear of approaching native speakers, I had to laugh, because one time many years ago, I made the classic mistake of trying to say something perfectly ordinary in a new language, but I mispronounced the words and accidentally said something extremely crude. What happened was that I was in Hong Kong for a week, and as in my usual habit, when I travel someplace new, I immediately bought a phrase book for the local language, Cantonese in this case, and I immediately started learning a few words and phrases. Then, a few days later, I was sitting at a table in a restaurant with 5 or 6 native speakers of the language. The conversation was in English because that was our only common language, but at one point someone asked me a question in English and I realized that I knew the right words to answer in Cantonese, or so I thought. It was only a 2-word phrase, but the moment that I uttered the words, everyone at the table burst into complete hysterics. Tears were running down their faces. They had trouble catching their breath, and one woman was so limp from laughing that I thought that she was going to slide right off her chair. So all in all, this was every language student's very worst nightmare. And I'm sure that many people would have been tempted just to run out of the room, if not out of the country altogether. However, what happened next was very interesting. Chinese people tend to be very polite, and as soon as they all calmed down, they were very quick to apologize for laughing at a guest like that. They said it was only because they had startled them so badly that they could not help laughing for a minute, for which they were very sorry. Of course, this immediately made me feel much better, but they did more than apologize. They explained that my mistake is very common and that small Chinese children regularly make exactly the same kind of mistake when they are first learning their language. So my mistake was perfectly normal and understandable. And the only reason that they actually laughed was because I just happened to say something outrageously crude, and also did so completely unexpectedly. Indeed, it was so crude that they refused to give me a proper translation, but said only that it was something sexual. However, better yet, beyond apologizing, they then spent about 15 minutes carefully explaining the exact details of my mistake and then teaching me the correct way to say the words that I had meant to say. They even repeated my mispronunciation a number of times so that I could hear the difference between what I had said and what I should have said. The result is that decades later, I still only know a few words of the language, yet I can still say that phrase correctly, as well as also saying the other phrase correctly. I've even told this story to other Cantonese speakers over the years, and they all laughed in the right places, so I know for sure that my pronunciation is now quite correct. Thus, There are 3 lessons that I would like you and your viewers to take from this story. First, pronunciation is really important. You can have a huge vocabulary and perfect mastery of the grammar, but if you cannot pronounce the words correctly, then people simply will not understand what you're trying to say, nor will you understand them. Conversely, even if you know only a few words and almost no grammar, but can't pronounce those few words correctly, then you can do something useful with the language, as would have been the case in this situation if my pronunciation had been better. So, pronunciation should be your first and greatest concern as a language student. This doesn't mean that you need to have native level pronunciation, but only that you need to be clearly comprehensible even if you still have an accent. Second, you will still make mistakes, and a few of them may be horribly embarrassing, but the truth is that a little embarrassment has never killed anyone. You'll get over that in a few minutes, but then you will have huge motivation to correct your pronunciation so that you never make that mistake again. So in the long run, mistakes are a good thing because they inspire us to work much harder in order to do much better. Third, you may find that the native speakers that you are talking to will actually be very kind and understanding about your difficulties. My Chinese friends were actually very impressed that I would take such a social risk in order to learn their language. They told me in so many words that they really admired and appreciated my obviously sincere interest in their language and culture. So the net result was that this mistake actually made for a much closer social relationship than we might have had if I already been able to speak perfect Cantonese. So guys, there you have it. What really happens when you completely destroy the pronunciation of something in front of a whole group of native speakers. It may feel horrible for a moment if you make a bad mistake, but it's not really a big deal, so we really should just relax and start talking. I particularly like the part about the native speakers actually helping this gentleman to correct his mistake, and now that I'm actually living in an English-speaking country, this is consistent with my experience as well. You might think that my English is so good that I would not make such mistakes, but that isn't really true. Now, let me share with you my own moments of embarrassment. During one of my conversations with a friend who is a native speaker, I wanted to say that my husband's niece is very beautiful. And I said, "You should see my husband's knees." Except instead of saying niece with an S, I said knees with a Z. Such a tiny little difference, right? But for a native speaker, it sounded like a totally different word. It sounded like knees. I heard myself say this word, and in a couple of seconds, I understood that it didn't sound right. And the moment I corrected myself, we burst out laughing. He was like, "Oh, and I was thinking, what was so special about your husband's knees? Were they that unbelievably beautiful or maybe badly scraped or something?" We had a pretty good laugh because it was really funny for both of us. And my second little example turned out to be a funny one as well. Again, because I was with a friend, but it might have caused a major misunderstanding if I had been talking to a stranger. During one of our conversations, I made a joke about my relationship with math. I mean, I know how to count, but I'm far better off with a calculator. So I said, "I love math. It's just that math doesn't love me." Or so I thought. Because what I really said was, "I love math. It's just that math doesn't love me." Meth is the English word for a dangerous, illegal drug. So now you can see where the confusion might have been. Again, we had a great laugh. And again, such a tiny little difference, right? Well, at least that's what non-native speakers think. So, as you can see, I still make mistakes, and particularly in fast-moving conversations. So, despite my relatively advanced command of the language, I still get a little nervous about that. And for all I know, I still might say something very embarrassing someday. However, I can also say that after being here for just a month and a half and speaking English all the time with everyone that I meet, I'm rapidly gaining confidence. And not because I'm not making mistakes, but rather because those mistakes never turn into big problems. If I don't understand something or someone doesn't understand something that I say, then we just focus for a moment on that particular bit of confusion, and then we just get on with the rest of the conversation. It's really no big deal. As long as you can explain yourself and laugh at yourself, you'll be totally fine. And you'll learn the pronunciation of that word for sure. After all, mistakes happen all the time. This is basically how we learn. The only people who don't make mistakes are the ones who don't do anything. And once you have spent even a few hours talking with native speakers, you too will probably learn just to relax and not to worry about it. All of this is to say that we are all in the same boat and to encourage you to speak and not to be afraid. Okay guys, that'll do it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If that was the case, give this video a like and share it with your friends. And if you're not yet subscribed but you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so that you always get notified when we upload new videos. And till the next time, bye.